Hey, what's up? Hello. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, everyone. The show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl, and today on the show we are continuing our Best Picture Revisiting series with the one, the only, Elvis. So if you see anything that you like in today's video, make sure to drop a comment, let us know, give us a like, give us a dislike if you do not like what we have to say about Elvis, but most importantly, subscribe because we have new videos out each and every day, and you definitely don't want to miss what we have coming up next. But for today specifically, we're talking about one of my favorite movies nominated for Best Picture this year, which I know a lot of people don't feel that same type of enjoyment, but this was my third watch of Elvis, my first since the second week of its theatrical release, and to me, it still holds strong. This film is directed by Baz Luhrmann. You know what that means? It has a ton of style. Whether it's in the film's editing, cinematography, costumes, hair and makeup, sound design, I could just keep listing them on and on and on. But the one that's most impactful to me is the one, the only Austin Butler's magnificent performance, which to me is so charismatic. But since we have a guest, Nini, who's my grandma, I'm going to let her talk about just what she loved about Elvis because she also rewatched this with me this week for her second viewing. So what did you think about it?
Well, the first time, this is one of two movies that I've seen twice that are in the best film category. And the first time I watched it, I was a little distracted by the Priscilla character because she just didn't look anything like Priscilla Presley. Where the Elvis character and his parents were pretty spot on. Colonel Parker's character was a little annoying too. But on the second watch, I was kind of over that and paid more attention to the just beauty of the movie. And Elvis was such an icon. I was a little young to appreciate it at the time, but I was around. But I didn't see a lot of shows that showed him moving the way he did in this movie. So now I really understand why they called him Elvis the Pelvis.
I mean, I dug the snow job that Tom Parker did, and I really wanted to hear the Santa Claus. But Matt, what did you think about Elvis this time around? Were you really excited to hear Elvis sing the Santa Claus?
Well, the first time I watched Elvis, I really liked it, and I still really like it. This is the first time I've rewatched it, and my thoughts haven't really changed. There's some things that I liked the first time around that I like even more this time, like the cinematography, the costumes, the sound design, which I think is brilliant. I just love the soundtrack of this movie. But honestly, it hasn't really moved up or moved down. Just all my feelings on everything here, whether positive or slightly negative, they've all just been amplified. So what I liked about it the first time, I like more about it this time. What I didn't like about it the first time, I liked a little bit less this time. But still, I really like this. It might be near the bottom of my Best Picture lineup if I were to rank them.
Well, as I mentioned before, this movie's main focus is on its lead star-making performance from, I'm going to butcher the Tom Parker voice, but my boy, Austin Butler. Because that's what I really like about this movie. Hey, that's what higher grade people would give than his performance itself. But I've seen that online, not just the Colonel's performance is divisive, but Austin Butler's is. And to me, that doesn't really make sense. I fell head over heels for this performance, but I know, Matt, you're not as head over heels. I'll talk a little bit more about
Nice
why
reference.
I love this. Why I love this so much a little bit later. But for you, just overall, what were your thoughts on Butler's take on the King of Rock?
So I'm going to start this off by saying I don't dislike Austin Butler in this movie at all. So I just want to say that up front because I might sound a little bit negative, but I don't feel negative about the performance. I just don't. I guess my thoughts on Austin Butler's work in this film is he's clearly put in a ton of work. He's clearly got the impression down. He has the movement down, the voice down. There's so much work that has gone into the impression. But for me, one of my pet peeves at the Oscars is that they really like giving impressions awards. They shower Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury in awards. And yes, it's a good impression, but to me, and this is Rami Malek, I don't see any life in that character. I just see an impression. I see a lot more life in Austin Butler's character, but that said, it still feels much more like an impression to me than it does a full realized performance.
It does. While I disagree, I'll dive into my personal thinkings on that in a later question here. But flipping it over to someone who I think liked the performance more to my level than to your level. What did you think about Austin Butler's performance?
Well, I loved it. I thought he looked like Elvis. He moved like Elvis. He had his mannerisms, and he sounded just like Elvis. Especially for me, the part that showed the 1968 TV special, he looked just like him, and he seemed just like him. If you squinted, you would think it was him. And I was 11 years old when that was on television, and I actually did see it. And the things I remember the most were his black leather suit and sitting in the middle of that small group with his guitar, because that's an image that I never forgot. I don't remember what he sang or whether he had dancers or any of that stuff. I just remember him sitting there with his guitar. And at that same time, there was a lady across the street from me that made scrapbooks, and she had two loves of her life. One was Tom Jones and the other was Elvis. And she probably introduced him to me more than anyone else as a singer. You know, I'd seen a lot of those movies, but not actually his singing.
Yeah, and I guess backpacking off that a little bit to, I guess, tease my more love for this performance is without him nailing all of, like, as you mentioned, Matt, it does seem like an impression at times, but if you don't nail the impression, the rest of the movie doesn't work. But like I mentioned, I'll dive into that a little bit here later. But what I want to talk about first, you mentioned more of how scenes feel like more like a trailer than a movie, but to me, that's the Baz Luhrmann special. We all have a history with him. He seems to be a director that you either love or you're really against. And he has the spectacular of the musical Moulin Rouge. Seems to be everyone's favorite. However, I love what he can add his like artistic flair into previously known stories or icons, like as we see with the Flair and Romeo and Juliet, modernizing The Great Gatsby and now combining all those aspects into Elvis. So, Nini, you've watched a fair share of Baz Luhrmann's movies, and you just saw Elvis for the second time. What about his style really just jumps out to you?
Well, I'm not as adept at analyzing angles and camera shots and all of the film speak and jargon, but I just love the flow of the sequences when Elvis was shown at different ages and in different settings, and the young boy running across the field to the revival and going back to the older man singing while Elvis was also singing That's All Right. The older man was singing it very slowly, and you saw some visuals of the other people that were in the club. I loved that stuff. I think the things that you feel like were like trailers are the things that I liked the most. I thought it was very artistic, and it brought me a lot of pleasure.
Yes, like backpacking off of that a little bit, just because I think it's a running gag here on the show that I use the word spectacular or bombastic, but that's really how you describe. That's how you describe Baz Luhrmann. That's his word.
That's your number one word. That's your word.
I mean, that's the Baz Luhrmann word as well, because like as she was mentioning, all of that style, it's all ramped up to 10, where it's like, as you mentioned before, a trailer, but that's just the feel of the whole movie. And whether it is the big production sets or the mixing of the sound design of the songs, like That's All Right with Elvis and That's All Right with the Soulful Singer and the Revival all mixed into that one, you get this whole big setup, big set scene all mixed in at one time. And you're just like, I'm digging this. I'm loving this. But we both just rambled on about our love of Baz Luhrmann and his style. But what about you? I know that you're a little bit more mixed with Baz.
Yeah, I like Baz. I think that here's my hot take that someone probably will get mad at me for. I think that Baz Luhrmann is the late 90s version of what the Daniels are right now with Everything Ever All at Once.
Okay.
And what that is something I'm going to dub ADHD cinema. It's just, it's dialed up to 11 all over the place. It moves so fast that you can barely keep up with what's going on. It's just an image here, image here, image here. I once read Baz Luhrmann say that as crazy as the movies he makes are, they're only 30% as crazy as he'd like them to be. he wants them to be so much more, but people have to pull him back and go, whoa, boy, whoa, Baz, stop that right now. You can't go that far. And I think that can be both incredibly fun with his movies, and sometimes it can be a little bit tiring. It can be a little bit hard to follow along, and it can give a little bit of a headache. I didn't feel that with Elvis, though. I definitely, the first time I watched Moulin Rouge, I had a headache. That was one that I liked much better the second time when I watched it.
Same.
But with Elvis, you know, overall, as much as I just criticized that movie trailer style of editing where everything flies by so fast, it's still fun. It keeps the energy up. And while I think it kind of made it hard for me to fall in love with Austin Butler's performance, it was the style of the movie, and I could get on board with that. And I had a lot of fun with it. It made it very visually flashy, very fun to watch. And I think one of you said it, but there's never a dull moment here.
I love that take of like the studio has to hold Baz back, because I feel like if he had his own way of what this movie would be, it's that opening 10 minutes where it feels very comic book-ish, like where it's very highly edited, highly cinematography, all that stuff all at once. And I feel like that's what his full movie would be. But clearly you can't do that for 2 hours and 40 minutes. So they had to stop him. But on the topic of this film style, I guess there's just so many technical aspects here. So I would love to hear what both of y'all's favorites were. Because for me, on like previous viewings, I just adored so much. But on this one, I really honed in on the cinematography just because that was a big topic of debate once I got the nomination this year. But I just love how it changes its colors, its lighting, its aspect ratios, and grading depending on like what era and what setting that you're currently in. It feels so engrossed, and it feels like this could be actual footage of Elvis. Like she had mentioned before, like if you squint, you could probably not tell who this is supposed to be. And for me, the biggest example of this would be on that U.S. tour that occurs during his year 1 and year 2 of Vegas residency, where there's moments where I'm like, is this a clip of Butler, or is this actual Elvis like running out of the stadium, or his back on the stadium? Like the specific angles, like his nose looks bigger than what it is on Butler. Like, is that the actual Elvis? But to me, it was just so eye-popping, like right off the bat, as I mentioned before, with that opening sequence. And my one knock would be something that you did mention before. I feel like the editing and the cinematography don't really allow each other to shine. It cuts too quick for you to really get a feel for that specific scene. Like this time watching around, even though I've said numerous times on the show before, the Vegas residency when he does Suspicious Minds is my favorite scene maybe of the full year. But in this sequence, I'm like, just stay with him for a few more seconds so I can see his full movement instead of cutting away to show it from like 4 different angles. But I just rambled on a long ways there. But Matt, I know that we've been polar opposites with its cinematography nomination. I've said it should win in this lineup. I know that you don't think that. So I would love to hear what technical aspect grabbed you the most, since I just rambled on for like 3 minutes about its cinematography.
Well, I actually turned around a little bit on this
Nice.
watch. I really liked the cinematography this time. It might not be my favorite in the category, but I have it above Empire of Light now, which you'll be very happy to hear. But I think that all 5 of the cinematography nominees, including Elvis, including Empire of Light, I think they're all very well done in their own ways. I really like the work on all of them, and I think Mandy Walker's work on the cinematography here is excellent. But I do agree with you. I think maybe the editing did a disservice to it by cutting so fast around and not allowing you to see the glamorous lighting. Something I really like about this movie is how Baz Luhrmann constantly makes the comparison that Elvis, he grew up worshiping superheroes, so he became one. I love that. And the cinematography, I think, goes along with that. It makes it feel like you're watching a superhero movie, not just a music biopic. But that kind of goes towards my favorite tech element of this movie, which would be the sound. The sound. I love the way that the soundtrack weaves in and out of very modern sounding instruments. It uses a lot of 808s and digital music, drumming and bass, and it mixes that in with Austin Butler and Elvis Presley's vocals. I think that's incredible. It reminds me of Baz Luhrmann did something with his version of The Great Gatsby back in 2013, where his vision for that movie was that in the 1920s, jazz was exciting. It was dangerous. It was fresh, and it got people dancing. It got people moving and excited because no one had ever heard anything like it at the time. But if you play 1920s jazz for a modern audience, they're going to think, oh, it's so cute and classic. It's so old-timey. But that's not what it felt like in the 1920s. And similarly with Elvis, if you just play Elvis's music now, people will go, oh, that's fun. It's cute. It's old-fashioned. But that's not what it felt like at the time. This music was new. It was fresh. It was exciting. It got the people going. And so what I love that he does here is that the music, it's not just Elvis. It's not just, we're going to play Suspicious Minds, we're going to play Hound Dog, or That's All Right. It's, we're going to mix that in with modern music so that people understand the feeling in the 1950s of how people felt when they heard this music for the very first time. It works so much better here than it did in The Great Gatsby. And that's my favorite thing about this movie by far. The sound work is incredible. They cannot get enough praise for that.
I really like the flow of the scenes, and I like the way they brought back little clips of earlier scenes because I enjoyed them the first time. I enjoyed them the second time. You know, the whole story of Elvis is so long and there's so much to tell. There's been different movies about him. Kurt Russell played him once. There was a movie called Elvis and the Beauty Queen. There was also a television series, temporary, what do you call it, television series. And
a miniseries.
Miniseries, thank you very much. I forget many words. But, you know, there's too much to tell in a couple of hours. So I think that's why they zipped around a little bit. And they definitely left out a lot of things and glossed over some others. But I just thought it was pretty to watch. I loved the colors of the pink suits he wore early in the movie and the downtown scenes of Beale Street, the colors and the lights and the cars, the way the cars looked. I just really thought it was a very visually nice movie.
We talked about Baz's style, we talked about Butler's leading role, but now let's dive into the script because this is where a lot of criticism comes from the film's naysayers. Because they say it's like a Wikipedia biopic. It doesn't dive deep into the person himself. It glosses over the character's life. And why do you have the choice of Tom Hanks, Colonel Tom Parker, being the film's narrator? However, for me, we're never going to really get a 100% and somewhat negative portrayal of one of these big superstars. I mean, you see Bohemian Rhapsody, you see Rocketman, you see Judy, and you most recently see I Want to Dance with Somebody. They will always be vehicles to promote the artist and help sell more records. And I believe that this film is an improvement on all of those because of the aforementioned visual and artistic styles it uses to tell this Wikipedia biopic. As someone who honestly did not know much about Elvis before watching this movie, I felt like I learned a lot. I wanted to go learn more. I sought out some Elvis tunes, and I guess you could say I caught the Elvis fever for a little bit. So in my eyes, the film accomplished its goals in like soaring fashion. And while I do see the negative points of telling this story from the Colonel's perspective, I like it how it's from him because he's the snowman. He's got to give us the snow job. He builds Elvis up to be a superhero, as Matt mentioned earlier on. And once we get that first performance on the hayride, we really see firsthand like, hey, this isn't just a snow job. Like, this is for real. He is bigger than life. He commands that stage. And if that scene doesn't work, we don't buy into this wave of passion for the singer for the rest of the film. And that also goes to Butler's performance. If he's not able to encapsulate this icon and nail the mannerisms, as you mentioned before, and feel like you can connect to them, maybe not as deep as some people would like, but still like get a connection for this character where it's not just like Rami Malek, where it's just like, hey, he can walk like him. At least Austin Butler can sing like him. But if you don't, like I said, if you don't buy the performance, like this would just be a major like flop. Like you wouldn't believe it, and then you would sit there for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Like, why did I just waste my time? But as someone who does know the story of Elvis and does enjoy his music, and someone who is invested in the character, Nini, what did you think of just the way they decided to showcase the story of Elvis Presley?
Well, I think I mentioned before that they definitely skipped some things and glossed over some things that were a little strange about Elvis, like him talking Priscilla's parents into letting him take her as a 14 or 15-year-old girl to live with him in Graceland, and them going along with it. And there were some other things. He cheated on her a lot with a lot of actresses. They did show some of the cheating, but not all of it. But what they did was show a beautiful man in a beautiful movie depicting a legend. And they did that part so well. I think if they would have added in some of those strange things, it would have taken away from the legend part of it and the good things about Elvis.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point there's another movie coming out this year called Priscilla, which is meant to focus on Priscilla's side of the story, and it's very likely we'll probably hear a little bit more about some of the manipulation and grooming and the cheating and the less favorable side of Elvis. We're probably going to see a bit of that in this upcoming movie.
Right.
Before we dive into Oscar prospects, Elvis is a long movie. I've mentioned it a few times. It clocks in at just under 2 hours and 40 minutes, but to me, it flies by, and that's for like a multiple of different reasons. I think there's so many memorable and outstanding sequences in this film that would all be up there with my favorites of the year. But to rattle a few off, the whole "That's All Right" mix at the beginning of the film with Elvis, younger version of Elvis at church, and a Big Boy Crudups tradition that Nini had mentioned before. The 68 comeback special, I think on this viewing may have been my favorite, just how I think that's the scene that best encapsulates all like the highlights of this movie. And then there's the whole final sequence as well of where Elvis is clearly on his deathbed, but still giving that one last impactful performance where they cut between Austin Butler and the actual Elvis itself. But I just want to focus on one here, and that would be the Vegas residency that I've talked about multiple times. And I feel like this is where the love of Baz's filmmaking and his directorial style just really get to shine. It's so immersive with its sound design. You feel like you're there in person. The production design, I think, gets to show off the most in this scene with how grand it is. And this is where a scene where you do get a little bit more extra time to just really take in, like, hey, this is a big place, and there's only one man who can open this place up, and that is Elvis himself. The editing, cinematography, and costumes are all flashy as well, with its colors, pacing, and just the scale I keep talking about. But as mentioned before, this movie does not work without Austin Butler. He just commands Elvis and brings him back to life, and it all falls on his shoulders. And all those technical elements before, no matter how positive they are, even if you cast someone else as Butler, like, not throwing shade, but like the Priscilla movie that you talked about before, I don't know if Jacob Elordi can do Elvis the way Austin Butler did, and that movie could suffer from his performance as Elvis, whereas here, this movie's risen by Butler's performance. And I just love how physical he is, and like you could call this like physical acting 101, but like as mentioned before, he nails the mannerisms, the body movements, the voice, and just like moving around, like as we still hear with award shows now, he still sounds like him. And like you can really tell like he put in everything that he needed to be to nail this performance, and something that you just do not want to take your eyes away. Like the casino owner who's like, hey, we need to keep him on stage as long as we can because he's just what the people want. So Matt, what scene really stood out to you in this most recent viewing?
I really loved the visual effects work and the way that Baz Luhrmann transitions us from one thing to another. One of my favorite visual moments that, I guess this is a moment that stuck out with me. It's not a scene, but it's a moment. There's a visual effect shot where the camera swoops over Las Vegas and it goes above a hotel, and then the hotel turns into a roulette board and it starts spinning around. I love that visual. It's so creative, it's so fun, and it really gets us invested in the world of the movie. It happens very early into the movie, I think, when Tom Parker's saying, this is my story, and I want to let you know I'm not the bad guy here. I'm not the bad guy. I just like gambling. And that moment helps establish just how bombastic, to use your word, this is going to be. But otherwise, positive and negative, there's no one scene in particular that stuck in my head.
Well, there was one for me when I read this question. This scene came to me right away. It's a really fleeting moment, but it was when Elvis and Priscilla were in her upstairs room in Germany, and he was wearing his uniform, and he looked into her eyes, and the way he looked at her was the way every woman wants a man to look at her. His eyes were glossy. I'm not sure how he did it because it looked genuine. And that moment really stuck with me. And like I said, it was just a couple seconds.
Well, that's the power of the Austin Butler Riz that will take him all the way to a Best Actor win. Because talking about
he seems like such a nice young man. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Austin Butler seems so lovely. Did you see at the SAG Awards the way that he kept standing up to help every single person up to get on that stage? What a nice, lovely person he seems to be. He just seems to be the nicest person in any room.
I agree, and that's one reason I really like him, and that's one reason I've been kind of like championing him all season. Like, hey, we need to get this man the award, because looking at Oscar chances, Elvis has held strong all season long. I'm pretty sure this was the either first or second movie that we talked about here on the show itself, and it's managed to get it all the way to Best Picture.
Jurassic World was number 1.
Oh, wow. Great movie. But it managed to get all the way to Best Picture here with Elvis with 7 other nominations. So, Matt, this is something that you and I have talked about at various different points of the season. What does this look like in the Oscar race? Because probably, unless something crazy happens on a preferential ballot, this is not winning picture.
I mean, even if something crazy happens with the preferential ballot, I don't think Elvis would be the one to triumph from that. I mean, we talked about it on our Everything Everywhere All at Once discussion. It would probably be Banshees that would overcome. So I don't see Elvis really having that chance. But you've been saying all year long, ever since our first review, Austin Butler is going to win the Oscar for this. That's probably the biggest one that... I mean, that's still a tough race, I think, because we've got Brendan Fraser, who is seemingly very strong. So, but I still think Austin Butler will probably win. Otherwise, this is winning the Makeup Award. Undoubtedly, no question in my mind, this will win the Makeup Award. And outside of that, it's likely to win Costumes, but I'm starting to lean towards Everything Everywhere All at Once in that category.
That's fair enough. I'm just still going to stick with Costumes for Elvis in addition to the 2 other that you mentioned, because we talked about this on our review. We talked about this many times. Catherine Martin, Baz Luhrmann, they do a movie. She's winning 1, if not 2. And production design doesn't seem very likely because Babylon is just the Hollywood movie that never can lose at the Oscars. So I'm going with 3 awards: Costumes, Hair and Makeup, Austin Butler. And I know I've said before cinematography, but I think I'm going to switch to All Quiet just because it is stronger after that BAFTA performance. But I would say its floor is 2 with Makeup and Butler, and its ceiling is 4. And somehow it still does manage to get cinematography, but I'm not going to predict that.
Rather than cinematography, I'd say it could win editing or sound, but not both. But it could win one of those.
Fair enough. What about you?
Well, I really think Austin Butler should win for lead actor. I think for editing, I'd have to go with Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that was some tricky work, and it just kept me glued to the screen. I can't really say what other awards Elvis could win, because I think Everything Everywhere All at Once is just going to win so many, but I think Austin Butler should definitely win. He has my heart.
Mine too. It just runs in the family.
It's you got that Elvis love in the blood right there, right?
100%. But
you guys should get those buttons.
Yeah,
I love Elvis.
I love Elvis, and you know what? We'll support the Colonel. We'll give him some extra bucks. We'll give I Hate Elvis, and I can get them out to people on our server.
Yeah, there's some people who really hate Elvis out there. Not the artist, but the movie. So, but I'm glad that we all like this movie. I mean, you guys definitely like it much more than I do, but I still really like this movie, and I don't want to seem like I'm negative on this. I think it's very well done.
Yeah, for everyone out there, definitely let us know your thoughts on Elvis. Do you have Austin Butler winning actor? What were some of your favorite moments? Because we all had different ones here. But until next time, my name is Dyl.
And my name is Matt, and this is Fantasy Filmball.